leave my own presentation, thinking that if ever I needed it, I could always pull it out and share a little bit about my work. And I needed it, so it's come in very handy. And I presented a couple of weeks ago at a Reggio Emilia conference, so I feel like it's all nicely ready to go. So I'll speak first, probably 20-25 minutes. Then we'll have a quick break, and then Iain and Lucy will share after that. So it's going to be quite interactive. So feel free to pop questions in the chat or put your hand up if you want to ask questions. There'll be opportunities to chat, and Iain's got some questions to pose. So he'd love some feedback and some ideas. So which is great, and really one of the things that I really was hoping to do in these research symposiums, to spark conversation and sharing of resources. So we have this one, and we also have one in November with Peter Westerby, which I don't know if any of you know Peter Westerby. I hadn't met him before. I met him on Zoom about a year ago and just loved his work. He sort of does that intersection between social justice, community work and spirituality in a way that hadn't quite seen before. So mark the diaries and come along. He's a really good speaker. I was really inspired by what he said. So we've got a couple of great roundtables as well. So I might make a start and talk about my work. So I don't know, Stephen, if you want to. Oh, okay. Ian's just asked a question about the
I'll put the link in the chat in case somebody missed it, Iain.
That'd be great. So Ian's just got a few reflection questions to go with his presentation. So do that. So shall I spotlight myself? It might be easier to watch than gallery. Is that okay? Don't think I can. Can you do that for me, Stephen? Just. There I am. Okay. So welcome. Thank you so much for coming along and really supporting the community of researchers, people that are in the Asia Pacific area that have a passion for research in the area of spirituality and spiritual direction. And what's wonderful is the diversity of that topic and how people come to it from all different angles. So my angle was really a bit unique, I think. I actually came to it through my daughter's kindergarten. So I did my Masters of Spiritual Direction at Campion just before Iain's time. I was probably in the first or the second cohort, and trained at Wellspring in my spiritual direction formation training. And I was finishing my Masters, and I think Bella was a baby. My whole Masters, I was either pregnant or breastfeeding or having a toddler. Anyway, I finished that, and I vowed I would never do I would never do a PhD. That's it. I'm done. I finished studying. And then a couple of years later, my daughter started at a really beautiful little kindergarten early learning centre in Melbourne. At the time, it was called St Leonard's. It was the campus of St Leonard's College, but it then became independent and became Cornish College. And my daughter started at the Early Learning Centre, and it was based on the philosophies of Reggio Emilia. So I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Reggio Emilia. It's a little bit like a Steiner, Rudolf Steiner or Montessori, very child-centered. It has an element to, it's very sort of holistic. And I took my daughter along in the 3-year-old classroom, and I was just instantly kind of blown away by this environment. They use lots of natural materials. So I walked in and it was sort of like this wonderland for 3-year-olds, and lots of beautiful drawings and sticks and leaves, and very nature-centered and beautiful staff. And I really saw very quickly that all of the values that I held as a parent were reflected in this early learning centre. Very much into respect, curiosity, compassion, you know, it was really inspiring. And part of the curriculum there, Cornish College is on the Frankston Freeway. So if next time you're going down towards the Millington Peninsula, you can wave. It's a big campus. It's on 80 hectares of land, most of it a natural bush setting. And the Early Learning Centre it had a practice where it would go on a weekly walk. So every week there was no such thing as bad weather, just inappropriate clothing. So the children would have all their gumboots and their bib and brace and jackets and things, and they would dress up. They would put their clothes on, and then they would go for a walk. And this walk took up about 2 or 3 hours of the day. So they would leave the centre, walk through a fairy forest where it was all decorated with sequins and things. They would walk through to a duck and a chicken coop area. They would drop their scraps, their food scraps from morning tea from the day before or lunch, feed the chickens and the ducks and collect the eggs. And then they would walk through, and the property had a beautiful big lake. And in the middle of the lake was an island with a little bridge. So the walk, there was a few different routes, but basically they would end up on this island. And there was a gathering place where there was a fireplace, and they would toast marshmallows and popcorn. And they would have, you know, sort of meetings where they would reflect on the walk and what was there. So they invited all the parents, cousins, aunts, uncles, everyone was welcome to come along on this walk. And so I started as a parent going on this walk, and it really was just a beautiful experience. These children just came alive outside. You know, they would pick up a stick and it would become a fishing rod, and they would pretend to be a fisher person. They would build cubby houses. They would, you know, just all sorts of amazing things. So that little sort of statement I made about I'm never going to do a PhD kind of turned into more of a, well, if I did do a PhD, I wonder whether I could do something on this topic, because I could see that there was a way in which the natural environment really nurtured the spirituality of young children. So these are 3, 4, 5-year-olds. So I went around and I chatted to MCD and I chatted to Australian Catholic Uni, and I ended up finding someone who kind of understood what I was trying to do. And so I started, and I did the data collection over about a year, ended up doing over about 4 terms. And the data collection started with actually giving the children a little video camera to take their own videos and then go back into the classroom and see what they took. But I didn't find I was quite getting the data that I was looking for. So with the children's permission, I ended up filming filming little play episodes. And then I would come back into the classroom a couple of days later and sit with the children and go through the videos with a process called stimulated recall by Thompson, without a P. And that was a really solid, really helpful data collection method, because I found that by taking a few days to sit, to let those incidences happen, to then go back and show the videos, children could really get in touch with what was happening in those play episodes. And what I found was really quite remarkable. I found that because I was doing this over a year, I would take my computer into the classroom and I would invite a few children who were in these particular videos. And I had them like little thumbnails on my computer screen. And, you know, the children would come in and I would show them videos. But then sometimes they would say, can I watch this one? And I would show them a video. And sometimes it was a video that happened maybe 12 months before, you know, 6, 9, 12 months before. And they could tell me exactly what they were thinking and feeling in that moment. Oh, I remember that. Jack kicked me then. I was feeling sad. Or I remember when I caught that big fish. And it really challenged my thinking about how memories of young children, you know, we think that they're very short term, but there was, you know, amazing evidence that children really do remember things. I had an incredibly supportive environment at the Early Learning Centre. The staff there could not have been more helpful. They were so supportive. I could come in at any time, you know, I could show the videos, I could go on the walks. And so my daughter kind of then finished her early learning journey, and I just kept I kept staying there. And I wonder sometimes about, it wasn't actually until the end of my PhD that I thought about, why 3 and 4-year-olds? What was it about that age group that really kind of captivated me? And I think for me, it was tied up with that first visit to the Early Learning Centre, when I walked in and I had this incredible environment. And I think it was this sense of, I wish I was 3 and 4 again. I wish I could go back to that moment where everything was new and exciting and possible, before kind of some of our cynicisms come in, some of our, hard moments we have to go through. And so there's something for me, and even since then, like, I finished in 2018, but I always feel, quite a pull, a sort of a pull towards that age group, that, when everything's kind of possible. So, so with my background in the masters, with my interest in spiritual direction, started my PhD and realized I knew nothing about education. I didn't have a degree in education. I had come from this whole area from a standpoint of spirituality. So I kind of basically had to do a bit of an education degree within my PhD. I came across the work of Lev Vygotsky, who was sort of a peer, I guess, to Jean Piaget. So not a peer, but kind of around the same time. So Lev Vygotsky was a Russian theorist, worked in the 1930s and 40s under Marxist Russia. And he was ahead of his time, an amazing, amazing thinker and researcher. He was talking about neuroplasticity 100 years ago. And he had a whole, he sort of developed this whole theory, this body of knowledge about how we learn. So while Piaget had a much more developmental, okay, at 3, children, need to be able to do this, and at 5, they learn this. And Vygotsky said, no, it's got nothing to do with age. It's got to do with the peer. It's got to do with your support system. It's got to do with who's around you. So he talks about a thing called zone of proximal development, which maybe some of you in education might be aware of. It's this idea that children learn in community with each other. That if they see a child who's maybe a similar age or slightly older doing something, they can learn how to do it from them. And I really was taken by Lev Vygotsky's whole model of sociocultural theory. He says that there's not a truth out there to discover, but that we build knowledge, we build understanding in community with each other. And that really resonated with me in terms of spirituality, because for any of you who have done research in the area of spirituality, trying to define the thing is, so hard. So here was a way of seeing it that wasn't trying to put it into a definition, trying to put it into a box, but to have this more expansive view of spirituality. So there's a few concepts that he used that I really liked. One, certainly the zone of proximal development, his idea of consciousness I liked. He has this theory called everyday and scientific concepts, which I loved. So what that is that when children are small, they kind of make their own theories about the world. So why it might rain, or why there might be a rainbow after it rains, or why spiders' webs exist. And they have their own theories that as a researcher are just delightful, because, you get this whole idea of, that maybe raindrops end up on a spider's web after rain because someone squeezed them on, and, just beautiful things. And then kind of as they age and they learn about real science, the everyday the everyday concepts that they've created sort of go, and then the scientific ones come, and we end up kind of having more of a scientific mode about us. But I just really liked it because it just gives you this insight into another way of seeing the world. And then the final thing that I came across was a concept called perishevane. It's a Russian word doesn't really have a direct translation into English. The closest is, and I've spoken to kind of modern Russian speakers, and they sort of use the word experience. But Vygotsky really talked about the idea that when we go back into an experience, so something happens that sparks an emotional response. Vygotsky thought it needed to be a traumatic event, but my research found that no, it just had to have an emotional response. So, and that could be a positive, it could be joy, it could be happiness, could be fear, could be curiosity. And in the inviting children to go back into those experiences, we can help make meaning. So I really loved this, and I had a look around, and some researchers from Melbourne, from Monash Uni, whose name escapes me just temporarily, Marilyn Fleer, she used it with some young children in the area of fairy tales. It's been used across a whole, a really wide variety, mainly children from primary to secondary. So this idea, what happens when we go back into an experience? Well, how does that nurture our sense of spirituality and connectedness? So I took that and I developed a framework, which I've now kind of developed a little bit more, and I call it the Sparks model. So I just wanted to sort of share my Sparks model. How are we going for time? We're okay. And what I found, as I mentioned, so just a spark can just be a moment. It can just be a moment in a child's day, in a child's life, where something is triggered, something is lit up in them. And as carers and teachers, educators, we can start to become, and parents, we can start to become aware of these moments. And we can see it in young children if we're open to it, if we're mindful of it. We can see that a particular incident has caused a spark, an emotional response. And then the next step is honoring those sparks. And so this is really an opportunity to invite young children to go back into that moment. And as I said, that moment can be, when it happens, it can be a couple of days later, and months. They will often, remember. So I chose kind of 2 or 3 days initially to go back and invite children. So I would video little incidents. I would go back into the classroom, and then I would just invite them to talk about what happened. And I found that the 5 senses was a really helpful framework for me. So what did you see? What did you touch? What did it feel like? What noises, sounds? Were there any smells, aromas associated? Any tastes? And I often find, I've done quite a lot of work with young children's meditation and mindfulness, and you can't go wrong using the 5 senses with young children. It's such a natural way that they absorb and take in information. So we honour the sparks by just providing opportunities for children to talk about them. It can be in small groups, one-on-one, larger groups, and just inviting children. What happened? Something happened when you were collecting those eggs today. Do you want to talk to me about it? And just in that, children are then able to be listened. We can ask open-ended questions, and really just listen to children and see what came up for them. The next step in the model is sharing the sparks, and this is where the socio-cultural comes in. This is where we are part of a larger community, and we invite other children who might have been in that moment to share their perspectives and their understandings. So kind of one of the core features or core stories in my PhD was an incident where at the start of the walk near the fairy forest, one of the young boys, I'll call him Felix, found a rabbit's foot, like a real rabbit's foot that had been maybe like eaten off by a fox or something. And I still remember when he first came and showed me that, I went, oh, a real rabbit's foot. Little did I know that rabbit's foot would become like the central tenet in my whole kind of, PhD and findings and discussion. So he finds this rabbit foot. It then travels all the way through the chicken coop onto the island. And I happened to be just sitting on a log when Felix decided that he wanted to bury the rabbit's foot. So I just sat there with my little camera and I wasn't saying anything, and I just filmed him. And I had no idea that he was aware of me being there. Anyway, this is a 4-year-old boy. He digs a hole, quite a deep hole. He puts the rabbit's foot in the hole. He gets some water from maybe like a water bottle or something, and he sprinkles the water into the hole. He then fills the hole back up. He then goes and gets 2 sticks and makes a cross, places it on the little hole, and then looks up right into my eyes, right into my camera. And he says, "Poor, poor rabbit. I'll never forget you. Every time I come on the walk, I'm going to think of you." And he did a whole funeral. This is a 4-year-old. Now, I don't know, and I still don't know whether he had a faith, sort of some sort of faith framework or background, but here is a 4-year-old doing a whole funeral from burial to eulogy. Anyway, some other children came up at that point and a discussion happened. So I'm just sitting here still filming. And he shared with the other children what had happened. And then one of the educators came up and she was just asking some open-ended questions, tell me about the rabbit and where's the rabbit now? And he had a theory that the rabbit, was going to heaven. And another child, in the group was saying, "Oh, no, animals don't go to heaven. It's only people that go to heaven." And so that started a discussion about the afterlife. And then a little girl who came along and she heard the story and she turned to her and she goes, "No." She goes, "When you're dead, you're dead." There's no heaven, which I just loved. Anyway, so from that discussion, we then a couple of days later, I went back and I showed the film, and he developed a little bit more of his theory about how the rabbit had gone up to heaven and God had used his magic to make him better. He was going to send the rabbit back to earth. And this whole kind of story evolved, and it was just beautiful. It was one of those moments where you're collecting data that makes it all worthwhile. So that sharing, one of the things I realized was how incredibly capable young children are at holding diverse realities. And I don't know about you, but there are adults that I know that can't hold multiple realities or other, other perspectives. And so that really challenged my thinking. The next step is finding meaning in the sparks. And so from those conversations, from that sharing, from that constructing knowledge and ideas and perspective, children are able to gain new knowledge, new understandings about themselves. And this really interesting thing happens at that point. Children go from being the protagonist, being the central character in that story, to kind of taking a step back and being a theorist. And that step back, perhaps from the first person to the third person, just gives you a different perspective. And I still keep thinking and reflecting about this because I think it's kind of at the heart of spiritual direction, that ability to go back into a spiritual direction session, talk about an event, and then just step back. It gives us this ability to see things differently, see ourselves differently, see ourselves in different roles. We can see our agency, we can see our voice, our resilience. So that was a really significant part of this model. And the more I used it, the more I realized how helpful it is to be able to provide children that opportunity. And finally, the last step is being transformed by the spark. So allowing those moments to dwell, to sink into who we are, to challenge who we are. So, for example, if we find ourselves in a situation and we were successful, something happened and we learned a little bit about ourselves, then we can take those into other other situations. And there was a beautiful little story of a girl, one of the children in the group. They'd built a cubby house, and they were playing in the cubby house, and there was an adult on the walk who was a friend of one of the educators, so he wasn't really known to the children. But he came along and started being the big bad wolf and pretending to blow down the cubby house. And some of the children got a little bit scared and they kind of left, but there was this little girl in there, and he starts huffing and puffing and pretending to blow the house down. And she could see that her friends were leaving the cubby house. She could see that this was not how she imagined the cubby house. Suddenly this cubby house was a place that was full of danger. It wasn't the safe place that she'd constructed. So this 3-year-old walks out of the cubby house. This guy is 6'3", like, huge, big guy. And this little 3-year-old, she puts her hands on her shoulder and she says, "Hey, I'm the good wolf." And she challenges this whole story. She subverts the story. And when I went back and I showed that video to her and we talked about it, and she saw herself as being strong and capable, standing up to a wolf, and so in exploring that, in letting her live that reality, she gets to see herself as someone who is strong and capable and can be challenged, can challenge situations. So that's what I mean by that final stage of being transformed, that we take these experiences, we learn from them, we adapt them, and then we take them into our lives. So for the spiritual directors on the call this morning, you're all thinking it's just spiritual direction. And yes, in that moment, that kind of light went on, quite sort of towards the end of the data collection. But what I was doing with these young children was spiritual direction. I was calling it the Sparks model. I was using Parashavana and lots of theoretical frameworks. But what it was the beautiful act of being present to another human being, of allowing them to share a moment that meant something for them, and to help them explore, to find their voice, to find their agency. And so so that's kind of where the doctorate ended up. I finished it in 2018 and graduated. And it's, I never got sick of the topic. As you can see, I'm really passionate about it. I loved, working with those young children. The data collection stage was just fabulous. I got sick of the writing and the rewriting and the editing and all of that kind of stuff, but I never actually got sick of the topic. So I just want to finish by saying, kind of let you know what I've done since then. It's always interesting to see what people do with their research. So I've written 2 books. So one is a teacher's guide that is currently being reviewed by Paddy Mellon Press, and I'm hoping that will be, it's currently being peer reviewed, and I'm hoping that will be published next year. It's very much a guide for early educators, early childhood educators, to help them recognize and nurture spirituality in young children. So spirituality is actually in the curriculum. It started with New Zealand. Our friends across the ditch are decades ahead of us in terms of young early education. They put it in their curriculum called Te Whāriki, which means the mat. Australia followed, and there's other places. So spirituality is actually named in the early childhood curriculums. But for a lot of people, if you can imagine you're a new graduate, you never grew up in church, never went on a retreat, don't have a spiritual director, it's not something that's very familiar. It's not something that you know about. You don't have the language. So my PhD and the subsequent writing is really about helping kindergarten teachers, early childhood educators to become aware of what is spirituality? What does it look like? What does it feel like? How do we recognize it? And then once we do recognize it, how do we nurture it? And then while I was waiting for Paddy Mellon Press, because they've been pretty slow, I wrote my own guide called Unplugged. I'll pop a link if that's okay in the chat. And it's a book on how to disconnect from technology and reconnect with each other. So Kath, I use the doctor. And it's a book. What I wanted to try and do was take the essence of the PhD and put it into a much more accessible way, get rid of all of the lit reviews and the discussion chapters. And so hopefully I've done that. It's quite accessible, and it's really designed for parents and families and anyone that is with, has young people in their lives. I've spoken at a few Reggio Emilia conferences, and that's been a really lovely experience. I find that a community of people that, it's funny, they don't use the word spirituality, but my goodness, everything they do has a very spiritual feel. So I find that a very beautiful community. And I've spoken at the Australian Journal of Early Childhood Research Symposium. And so, yeah, and then I've just been invited to write a chapter in a book about early childhood, spirituality in early childhood. So ticks along. It's not something I pursue, on a full-time basis or anything, but I like to keep, I like to keep sharing what I found. So, open it up. Any questions, any comments, anything you'd like to know, I'm delighted to share with you.
If you want, this is Stephen Crandell from SDI. I'm just facilitating, but if you want to put in a question in the chat or just raise your hand, we're a small enough group that we will probably see you, or you can use the raise hand function. Ian looks like he has a question. Go ahead and unmute yourself and ask.
Was that a clap?
Thank you. Clap. We'll count it as a raised hand.
That's both. Yeah, thanks, Kristen. I got a sense, and you may say that's not the case, or you may clarify, that what you thought you were doing at the beginning of your research and what you ended up with seemed to be rather different. Your path took you somewhere much more exciting. Is that right?
It's very insightful of you, Ian, very insightful, because about a year or two in, I was in the data collection phase, and I had a very clear idea that what I wanted to discover was how nature nurtures the spirituality of young children. And I ended up having a main supervisor who was an atheist, who didn't believe in God, which was a little challenging. In some ways, I thought, well, if I can convince her and then I can write it in a way that she believes what I'm doing, then everyone will believe it. But she didn't quite get it. So I would come to meetings and I would say things like, there's something about children being in the outdoor environment. And she would say, stop saying that. So stop saying there's something. Give me evidence. Tell me what it is. And it was a really frustrating thing. So I had this moment about 2 years in where I had a progress, one of those progress presentations. And God bless Peter Bentley. If anyone here knows Peter Bentley, he was my only source of support in the meeting. And I wanted to use Gillian's listening voice, voice-centered relational methodology. And I had this whole idea about that was the approach I was going to use. And I was basically told in that meeting, there's no way that you can prove that nature nurtures the spirituality of young children. And Peter and I fought, but we were up against it. They just couldn't see how, what I was trying to do. They didn't think my data supported it. So I ended up having to pivot and so my supervisor, my atheist supervisor, she was a specialist in early childhood. So I ended up deciding that what would be really useful was if I could make it useful for early childhood educators. So I kind of turned it into more of this is what spirituality looks like. This is how you nurture it. But, I still have that question. I still have that hypothesis, I guess, that young children having to be able to go in and just have time in nature and not in a structured way. So often children go outside and they're playing basketball or they're, on the swings and slides, but to actually have unstructured time where, you lie on the grass and you look at the clouds or you pick daisies, or you look at the ants climbing up the trunk of a tree. So yes, very perceptive. And yes, it did change. And it was a pretty low moment, can I say, in my PhD, because it was, you know, I really wanted that to be the research, and it didn't turn out to be. So yeah, thank you for the question, Iain. Yeah.
Kristen, Claire asked, do you have any sense of how this relates to older children, primary age children?
Yeah, look, my focus was definitely on early childhood because of my obsession with 3 and 4-year-olds. But yes, I think it works. This model, this framework, this way of listening and exploring with children, absolutely. And with adults, I don't think there's an age limit at all. I think it's a pretty sound framework. I used it a lot, and I've used it a lot since. And it's pretty helpful. It's yeah, in helping people depth. So yes, definitely, Claire, definitely. Yeah.
I have a question, Kristen.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that struck me was that a key to, at least to the stories that you told, was showing the video of the child doing something and then being very open to how they spoke about it, how they responded to it. And I thought that that's fairly brilliant, even though a lot of us get kind of video phobic as we get older. I wonder if you've ever thought about how that could be introduced into some sort of regular spiritual companionship.
That's a good question. It's an interesting question. I know some of the training programs use video, like for triads, to go back in. I think there's definitely less of a hesitancy with young children. Like, I think, to me, I know I could be wrong, but I didn't get a sense that there was a barrier, you know, that they weren't conscious of being filmed. They talk about, I can't remember what it was called, the fluid wall, I think. It's this idea of the barriers that video puts, and children have less of that barrier. Yeah, I don't know. I wonder, I don't know how people would feel about being videoed in a session, or yeah. One of the things that was really interesting is I would go back and I would open up my computer with those thumbnails, and I would invite a child in, and I would often show them a video, and they would say, again, I want to see it again. And I would play it again, and they go, again, and I would play it again. And I remember with my daughter, when she was that age, and she's 17 now, but when she was that age, that was like almost her first word, again, again. And it struck me that sometimes we do need to go back into those, you know, we do need to tell those stories, keep telling those stories, keep seeing those things. So it's a really good question about the role of video. Yeah, I'm open if other people have any comments, particularly if you've used it in your training program. I didn't at Wellspring. We used written transcripts, but if anyone wants to share what that was like using video, I don't know which other formation programs do it in Australia, but. Kath, yes.
I'm just wondering about the long-term effects of such a wonderful preschool education, and whether, you know, there's any show of your daughter or other children you've kept in touch with, the influence of such an amazing education from that age. If you've got any comment on that.
Yeah, it's a great question, Kath. I like to think it had a profound impact on the children that went through, to have such an environment where they were so honoured, like the children were truly honoured and listened to and really seen, you know. And there's certainly elements of environmental kind of stuff, like, you know, all my daughter and her peers are very environmentally aware. Now, you know, I'm not sure, but because they, you know, they were part of the land, and they would often invite Indigenous people, and the Indigenous people would come and tell stories of the land and things. But I really do think and I would love to. It's been one of those questions, Kath. Could I go and do a post study and think and talk to some of those children and the impact, you know, that it had? Because how can it not? How can such a beautiful, nurturing, honouring environment not have an impact on who they see, who they were, who they saw themselves, how they,
Yeah.
Really,
Thank you.
it's a pretty special place. Yeah. I'm interested, Kath, in, oh, sorry, go on. I might turn it back. Can I turn it back to gallery, Stephen, so that I can, oh yeah, no, I can do that. Someone else had a question? Oh, Anne from New Zealand. Hello, love. Anyone else want to say something? Aviva.
Thanks.
Hi,
And
Aviva.
I think Catherine also wanted to speak. Hi, Kath, and hello, everybody. Greetings from Melbourne. There's so much to respond to. The first, not least, that the atheist supervisor hasn't yet learned that spirituality doesn't equate to religion. So I'm just curious about that terrible moment when we finally commit to supervisors, even though they're not the ones we need. So, that's a kind of faith journey in and of itself. So good on you for sticking and getting done. The methodology, goodness knows how you navigated the requirements of child protection with all the filming.
I didn't talk about ethics. I had a note in there about ethics. Can I just say, videoing young children akin to medical trials? Yes, it was one step below medical trials. It was yes, pretty involved.
Speaking as someone who's been sitting on the National Health Ethics Committee for 6 years, I take my hat off to you for getting permission. The photo that I'm just about to show you sits over my work desk. And it's just to pick up the story of the child doing the funeral for the rabbit's foot. Without her permission, I'm showing you a photograph of my daughter, my granddaughter, who came home recently and said that her pet lamb, which was her first toy, her comfort toy, who has an imaginary sister and an actual physical sister, which is a different model of the same lamb, that the imaginary sister had died and they needed to do a funeral for her, and would her mother please take out a memorial candle and set it up as we would for any other actual member of the family on the dining room table. And this is Sophia in deep contemplation around the funeral that she's constructed.
Look at that.
So she's exactly the target age. She was 4.5 at that point. And there is such a deep inner spiritual world that she is very clear about. I don't see why we couldn't do the equivalent of the 7-Up UK developmental study and see what happens to spirituality long term. I think it's wonderful.
Yeah, it's one of those, it's funny, spirituality is one of the few things that develops throughout our whole life. We kind of learn to write and then it's sort of set in concrete or whatever, but spirituality is with us our whole lives. And, and if we're open to it, we can, further depth. And yeah, what a beautiful photo. Thank you, Aviva. I just love the look on her face. It's just that. Yeah, it's real. It's interesting you talk about imaginary friends. One of the beautiful girls in the group, she had an imaginary friend called Stinky. That I would have loved to have done a whole PhD on Stinky. It was, I didn't have the, you can't go down every rabbit hole, you can't go down everything, but some of the conversations, she was at a particularly spiritual, certainly a child in tune with her spirituality, and Stinky became this voice for a lot of the spirituality concepts and things that she was thinking. It was truly amazing. I would have loved to have done more with that. Yeah.
Well, you will, because it's the first of your new series of TED Talks.
Margaret, did you have a question? Margaret T?
Yeah. Oh, Margaret Trevathan, yes.
Yeah.
What's listening to you has sparked in me is a memory of about 20 years ago when someone talked about the problem with the way we educate do religious education is that we answer children's questions before they even ask them. And then, of course, they just lose interest. So I'm inspired by what you've said in that sense, that it really respects the innate spirituality of young people, doesn't it? And their capacity to make meaning. And it's like bringing it out and putting it on the table without having to put a framework around it. So it's a way of discovering, of having them discover and trust their natural instincts and innate spirituality, I think.
Oh, absolutely,
So
Margaret. Absolutely. And one of the things that struck me, every educator in that centre, I never once saw them answer a question directly. But we were out there and some of the children found toadstools. And so instead of the teacher, which, you know, your whole instinct as an adult is to protect them and make sure they don't pick them up and put it in their mouth. No. The children came over and the educator was there. There was about 4 or 5 children. And she opens, what do we think this is? And someone said, I think it's mushrooms. And another child said, no, I think it's toadstools. Can we eat toadstools? And she absolutely embodied this idea of bringing out what the children know. And it's the complete opposite of that tabula rasa, that children are this, you know, blank, clean slate, and they need to have information shoved into them. The complete opposite of that continuum, at that complete other end, is no, children already know. They know things, they know what they need to know. You know, and so this whole conversation, and it was so challenging to me, because all I wanted to say was, don't touch them, whatever you do. But no, she used that as a learning opportunity. What do we know about mushrooms and toadstools? And yes, absolutely, Margaret. Yeah.
And also that capacity to, like you said, one kid said, oh, when you're dead, and another one said you go to heaven. And, you know, it gives them the opportunity to listen to other frameworks and make their own sense of, you know, and respect others too. So, yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Margaret. Yeah. Someone else have a question? Put your hand up. Ian, another question?
Just a response to what you, Margaret, was saying. Thanks, Margaret. Akin to that idea of letting children explore concepts in their own terms. Many years ago, when I was doing philosophy, my research paper was on philosophy for children, and I discovered there that there are groups, that there are some educators, you can call them, in certain schools that will call children, this is sort of year 6, year 7, call them together in small groups, and they'll explore a concept. The formator will give a story of something that's connected to their life, and then invite them to explore that and unpack it and find out, well, what does this mean? What are the ramifications? And they can touch on areas of sort of behavior and ethics, and on how society is shaped and how we behave, with difference between friends and non-friends, and explore a whole lot of concepts just from a story. And they talk about it among themselves and make some tentative conclusions. But it's a philosophical approach, which is very like the one that you and Margaret have been talking about, a spiritual appreciation and verbalizing that. So that's just my contribution to that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Claire, hello. No, you're still muted, love.
Okay, I'm here.
Yeah.
I'm interested in the resonances between your model and the godly play approach. We've used godly play with our children, which is it's Montessori based and very similar kind of ethos of enable the child to, you know, go in their own direction and not guide them, but give them opportunity. But that's a specifically Christian context. And so I'm interested in how your kind of approach fits into that, because we're finding as our kids, you might have seen them in the background on their way to school earlier, as our kids are hitting sort of upper primary and heading into high school, that godly play doesn't work for them anymore because it feels childish. How this kind of approach can transition with children as they get older if it's not perhaps anchored to such a Christian context.
Yeah, great question. My co-supervisor was a godly play, Brendan Hyde. So he's right into godly play. I didn't do a huge amount of work with it. I kind of had a good look at it. I was quite keen to take spirituality out of a religious framework. So I kind of wanted to see how spirituality transcended religion rather than grounding it in it. But yeah, from what I've seen, it's a wonderful model, and it works really well. And yeah, it'd be good. I probably need to have a bit more of a look at the godly play, and maybe you and I could have a chat about it, because I'd love to think that the model that I've got, this Sparks model, may be able to adapt to. So if you still wanted to do it within a religious frame, you could still probably absolutely bring in kind of, Bible stories using, maybe like a retelling of the Bible story, and then what sparked in that retelling, and then maybe using the framework to do that. So yeah, but I can see that it works. It's worked really well. So yeah, but let's have a chat about it, Claire, because I'm kind of just open to what this might look like, how it might be taken into different. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Any other questions, or should we take a quick pause? Oh, Claire, Kathy. Hi, Claire. Kathy, nice to see you.
Hi.
Welcome to WA, another WA person.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you very much for telling us about your study. As you were talking, I was really reminded of my son at that age. He's now 19. But my husband and I used to describe him as very in tune with the spirit. I could tell you many stories of just strange things that happened where we'd go, "Who is this child?" and we've sort of kept those stories going as he's grown up, and told them every now and then. But now at the age of 19, he sort of doesn't even remember them. He says, I don't remember that. I didn't do that. Like, where did you get that from? And he's a little bit defensive about it even. And so the question I have is, have you experienced working with adults at all where you've helped them to recall or remember their childhood spiritual experiences? Has that been anything that you have experienced or for yourself?
Yeah, so there's a few researchers, I'm trying to think of their names, Tobin Hart and a couple of others, who back at the beginning of this kind of research with children decided that children couldn't possibly know about their own spiritual experiences. So you have to go to adults and you have to get them to remember spiritual experiences. And then, so they did a lot of research there. And then then it sort of started with high school students, then it went to primary school, then it went back to kindergarten, and there's people now doing preschool. So there's a bit of a history, of that. Yeah. I do quite a lot in my own spiritual direction practice of working with children, working with adults as they think back to those moments, because they can be such key moments in their, let's say, faith journey. If they're a person of faith, they can be key moments in their faith journey. But even if they're not, it can be key moments in their life where, these moments happened and something sparked, and sometimes that spark can sit there untapped, like it's not until we go back in to do the other steps that we often find meaning. So sometimes it can be really valuable as a spiritual director to go, if it comes up, or I have to do a bit more thinking about how we uncover those moments to then go and explore them. But I've been doing quite a bit of work since my PhD on narrative therapy and the intersection. There's a woman called Diane Millis who's done some brilliant work on spiritual direction and narrative. And the idea is that no story is ever complete, that we can always go back into a story and we can always find more meaning. And that the healing that can come when we go back into stories and we can find new ways of reflecting on them and finding them. And it led me to think about, when I was helping Diane edit her book, was that if as caregivers and parents and teachers, we can go back into those moments where the stories happened, and we can create more generative, more a wider, deeper way of interpreting it, because we make stories mean things. So something happens and someone yells at us and we make that story mean that we can't ever speak up in class or something. But if you can catch it when they happen during a child's life, then you've got this opportunity to expand it, to make it wider and bigger and have more meaning. So in narrative, they talk about thin and thick narratives. So thin narratives is this happened, therefore I'm useless or something, very, very surface, very quick assessment. And thick narratives are this happened and this was one way that I thought about it, and here's another way, and here's another, and having other people come in. This is where they're sharing the sparks. You get these different perspectives and different people asking questions of the same sort of thing. So yeah, I haven't answered your question. You've just caused more me to ask more questions and think more about it. But yeah, but I think if you can hold them, I wonder whether when your son then becomes a parent, I don't know whether there's an opportunity to revisit them and say, did just in this really gentle way, do you remember when? Yeah, because I guess, I see it in my daughter who's 17. She kind of is embarrassed about all the things that happened as a child, and then I think you need to go through that stage, and then maybe you come back at it a bit later and you find it you're a bit more open to it. Yeah, you find them a bit more endearing. Yeah. All right, I'm conscious of time, so I'm gonna force a pause. Feel free to pop any questions. I will stay during the break. Let's just take kind of just 3 minutes, so we'll just come back up to the top of the hour, or 1 minute past because it just clicked over. So if you need to go and grab a drink, a cup of coffee, go and bio break, as someone said, and we'll come back in a couple of minutes with Iain, and then we'll have some more talk. We'll have a chance at the end as well after the 3 presentations to talk some more. So
your question about the idea of videoing and capturing, and also related to your idea, Kristen, about this capacity to step back and observe. And I notice, because I'm a spiritual director and a coach, and these days I do most of both of those conversations on Zoom. And when I have my coaching hat on, it's often quite common that the conversation will be recorded. And often I find that there's sometimes real value in actually offering the recording back to the person afterwards, because all of these new learnings and emerging growth and, thinking about narrative therapy, these new golden threads or beginnings of new stories come forward. And I just think, if you can really hear and take in what you're saying right now, like this is quite transformational, that's coming right from the edge of your own growth and understanding. And there's been times where I've been coached, where I've listened back to myself and gone, wow, is that what I'm thinking? Is that what I'm learning? And so I do have moments where I'm in the middle of a spiritual direction session that is unrecorded, that I go, I wish this was recorded and I wish I could play this back to them and they could actually watch themselves and hear what they're saying. So there's another whole set of questions around whether that would change the nature of the conversation, but it's an interesting question. And I think it's a possibility.
Yeah, it really does. Because I know when I go to my own spiritual director, I always try and journal afterwards and try and kind of, capture the essence. But there'd be so much that you forget, don't you? But yeah, you'd love to go back, wouldn't you? If you're like, oh, wish I could go back to that session I had 4 sessions ago that was really profound and had this big breakthrough that I can't remember now what it was. Whatever it is, yeah. That's a really good question. It's a good question. And I suppose technology allows us to do it if we wanted to do, that. So,
could be something to experiment with people who are open or willing.
Yeah, I like it. Wonderful. I think most people are back. Oh yeah, I should be back. So I'm going to hand over to Iain Radvan, and he is going to present his roundtable. So hopefully you have the questions in the chat. Stephen popped in the link, so there's a form there to download. He's got some reflection questions. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Iain. Welcome, and thank you for being part of today's roundtable.
Thanks, Kristen. I'm in the perhaps 2/3, 3/4 of the way through mine, so I haven't yet got to the high mountain where I can see, oh, so this is what it's all about. I'm still working my way through. So today, I'd be very happy for people to give their input, which might shed a little light on what exactly am I finding. And so I hope you've got the handout with the quotes from one of the interviewees. So I'll show my slide. Okay, so my topic is the nature of the experience of spiritual transformation by Jesuits through the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius of Loyola. I'm going to stop sharing. I don't know if I'm pinned up, but that might be helpful, but I'll go back to the slides when I want you to look at them. Otherwise, you just see a boring slide when I'm talking. So the transformation I'm searching is known in academic circles more as conversion. That's the word that's used more often. Common to most psychological and sociological studies, conversion is understood to occur when a person finds some strong dissatisfaction in the meaning of their life and begins to seek a new sense of purpose and meaning, and at the same time they find a group that matches their needs and which encourages them. And this person marks such an event as a definite time in their life. Conversion, as experienced by St. Paul, used to be the paradigm for Christian conversion, is less common and less often now the subject of this study area. Types of conversions include the change of one's worldview from one faith to another, from unbelief to belief, or the other way around, belief to unbelief, from a superficial adherence in a faith to a deeper one. Conversion has been studied in many fields: anthropological, sociological, psychoanalytic, psychological, and theological. In most psychological, anthropological, and theological approaches, this moment in life is seen as just part of the whole human journey towards wholeness and integration, both within the person and between the person and their society. The result is a new orientation of values and behavior, perhaps a whole new worldview or a deepening of the former one. So most studies of conversion see that there are stages that a person goes through. The general pattern of a person who reports an experience of conversion starts with a search. The seeker is not finding their current faith, belief, or community satisfying to their emotional or intellectual needs. When they find a cognitive system, which may include a sense of the sacred in a religious conversion, and a community that is attractive to them, they then go through a struggle to let go of the certainties of their old worldview and emotional attachments as they move into the new one. Eventually, in this pattern, there is a surrender, which can feel like a dying of one's old, known, and cherished self, which is followed by a rush of energy and delight as the person discovers the right fit for the new worldview they are adopting. Many studies note the powerful influence of the community that encourages or welcomes the seeker. So what kind of, what description or definition of conversion am I using for my thesis? Well, my framework is going to be largely constructed on the work of scholars Paluzzian and Park. These two have presented a theory of conversion as a development of many other previous studies and theories. So they did a literature study of everything on religious conversion, and then they said, this is where we're going to take it. They identify a common theme or pattern of many of the theories of conversion and transformation, which is the purpose and result of the struggle and surrender of a person who says they have been converted is a change occurring in their meaning system, that is, in the mid-level and global level functions of their personality. These include an ultimate concern, which may include a sacred being, attitudes and beliefs, values, goals, and behaviors, a sense of purpose and a clearer or newly defined self-identity. A meaning system integrates cognitive, affective, motivational, and behavioral elements. These components of the meaning system can be identified separately, but they also act dynamically with each other. So in my thesis, I agree with those who argue that conversion or transformation is not merely or only an intrapsychic event. It requires a movement into a new social group with whom the subject feels more themselves, more at home. And this group has to welcome the person as compatible with them. And this is called the person-environment fit. And Paluzzi and Parker name that, and they take it from sociological studies of conversion. And they say that constitutes part of a larger framework that holds together various theories of conversion from different psychological perspectives, like attachment theory. So in my framework, this person fit model matches the preconditions for the transformative experience of a Jesuit in spiritual exercises. That is his call to join the Society of Jesus. So my subjects are Jesuits who've gone through the spiritual exercises. And a person who moves with the dynamic of the spiritual exercises will certainly have their values and worldview challenged and stretched. So that spiritual exercises, for those of you who've forgotten or not quite familiar with it, the Jesuits, a 30-day experience of silence. You see spiritual direction once a day, and there's a set program of meditation and scripture passages, and the person meets Jesus and discovers God's love for them. Michael Ivins, a renowned scholar of the exercises, writes, "The essential conversion of the exercises consists in making the transition between two ways of relating to Christ. The relationship which might be described as that of ordinary devotion, which is compatible with a high degree of egocentricity, and the relationship in which the center of gravity changes, and from being centered on self, the person becomes centered on Christ. As Ignatius writes in the exercises, relinquishing self-love, self-interest, and self-will." The spiritual exercises are not, and have never claimed to be, a sure-proof way of inducing the conversion or transformation in a person. Generally, though, the outcome is positive. In most cases, out of the hundreds of thousands who have experienced the exercises, the exercent emerges from it less self-centered, more compassionate, desirous of serving others, more confident in God's presence and help, more sensitive to God's Spirit moving in them, and with a new vision of what life is about. One of my directees is a seminarian who's just gone through the 30 days, and he was glowing. Just a couple of weeks ago, he reported on his experience of the spiritual exercises, definite changes, and that kind of thing. That's a bit like those moments where you almost want to video it so the person can go back and discover more and more of what happened and what they think about it. For a Jesuit in particular, there are expectations that as a result of his formation, embryonically after the exercises, but emerging throughout his years of formal formation, he will be trustingly obedient to his superiors, lovingly tolerant of his brothers, available to serve at any time and in any place, humble in gratitude for all God's gifts, and most of all, displaying in some way consistent with his personality, a deep and vibrant love for God in the person of Christ, the risen Lord. Now, in my research, I was aware that the exercises have this impact, but I also wanted to include the external factors, the things that happen before and after that, either build up that experience or diminish it. The exercises don't succeed in bringing about a conversion or transformation just on their own. And so the things that I considered were the training or quality of the one giving the exercise, the disposition of the person entering the exercises, how courageous are they, how free are they, how willing are they. And then subsequent to the 30 days, the ongoing formation of the Jesuit, which includes the quality of community he is part of, which should model in some way the new life he's discovered. Any reflection or study on the exercises and how he in turn might give them. The quality of ongoing spiritual direction and other perhaps unnoticed factors. From all the theories and case studies of religious or spiritual conversion I read about, I constructed my own framework that shows the stages of conversion through the spiritual exercises for a Jesuit. So I will now share my framework. Trying to advance, it won't work. No, it won't advance, so I'll just go back. It's not looking at the right page.
We could see it fine in that.
Now, what I can see is the first page of the slide.
Yeah.
Okay, what are you looking at?
Yeah, the same. But when
Well,
you went,
it won't go to the second. Oh, there it is.
Oh, there you
Okay, now it's active. Okay, so that's my framework. So on my left-hand side, there are just sort of background stuff about the fact that a human being is a creature but self-transcendent. Then there are the preconditions, so the background to come into the exercises. The first conversion of perhaps the person believing in God, believing in Jesus, sense of call to the society, personal development. And then there's the process of the exercises itself, which is often called the second conversion. So the first one might be, yes, there's God there, I believe in Jesus, but you meet Jesus as a living person. So the theory that I sort of built up from the other theories of conversion is that there's a struggle or invitation to move from something old and previous to something new that involves the surrender of values or your image of God or self-will. And then the result of that is a consolation. There's a peace and energy. Some people describe it as falling in love. Just moving to the other side then, the actual subjective experiences that a Jesuit can have, or that I'm presuming this framework would explore if they have, is a felt experience. So it's not just an intellectual discovery, insight, but it's something they feel in their body, this change. It involves the love of God for him, for the Jesuit. And this love of God, which is so overwhelming, brings about a change in his worldview. As Ivan's put it, it shifts the egocentricity to the Christocentric point of view of how I want to operate in the world. And it changes your view of other people and what your goals are, your values, and yourself. And then that inserts you more into the Paschal mystery, the death and resurrection, and your part in that, and in the role of the community who are also going through the Paschal mystery as a whole. And finally, there's a stronger orientation, more active orientation towards helping others. And going back to the left side, what people are looking out for, spiritual directors, but others are looking out for in the person who's had this experience in exercises is evidence of more humility, more obedience or availability, more detachment in the sense of less my agenda, more altruistic. And finally, I wanted to follow up with, well, what things after the exercises support that change? Community life, spiritual direction, prayer, etc. So then to get this data to work out, does my framework really work? I did a survey and did some interviews. So having read much on how to create surveys, it's a completely new thing for me to do. I composed a set of around 50 questions that would elicit responses related to my framework, as well as obtaining some demographic data. About half the questions were short answer, the others yes or no, or sought indications on a scale. Most respondents answered the questions helpfully, though I eliminated a couple of questions later because they just didn't bring up the responses I was looking for. As they didn't understand the question, I didn't put the question correct. So I sent the survey as a link, as a Google survey, which is a very helpful tool, to 29 provincials or provinces that use English as a common language. only half of those provincials passed the survey on. So I was looking for at least 100 and I got 72 responses over 2 months. So I worked with that. So now I'm going to show you a little work. I'll just give you a minute to scan the questions on the survey. There are 2 pages. This is the first one. I'll go to the next page. So the responses, when I gathered all the data, gave me a sense of the exercises. It seemed to touch that my framework had some validity. Many responses touched on affectivity, joy, healing, cathartic tears, which is part of the new felt experience. A lot of them mentioned the love of God or Jesus for them with words like friendship, intimacy, love. A lot mentioned a significant change in their worldview using words like new orientation, new direction, foundational change. A lot of them gave evidence of a reordering of their values, goals, and perceptions of self-identity, particularly in the sense of I'm a sinner, but I'm accepted and loved. The part where I ask about, or where I'm looking for data on resulting in a more active orientation to others, emerged with expressions such as giving service, spreading the values, having a mission to the poor. So I then went to, of those 72 who responded, at the last question of the survey was, would you be willing to be interviewed? And about half of them said, yep. And I picked 8 of those. So I'll just go to those questions. So these are the questions. Now, I didn't ask them specifically with that wording or in that order, but I had that in my mind as we're going through. So the interview was more of a sort of a chat, sharing stories. I'd throw in some question where it seemed relevant, and I'd let them talk and might follow up on some details of what they were saying. But that's a general idea of what I was looking for. So what I did then was I got the transcript through Zoom. I sent it to Tammy, which is a program that puts things into word text from speech. And from the text, I drew out meaning units and various themes. I clustered those together under the categories that I developed from the framework. So the things that seemed to fit in the framework, I put in. Other things didn't quite fit. I had to make sort of new categories, and others didn't seem to be relevant, and I left them aside. So what I like to do is with the handout, you've got the handout extracts, actual quotes of one person who I interviewed, and where I put them into the categories that come out of my framework. And what I'd be interested in with your feedback is fairly specific, although you may have other things you want to say. These questions: to what degree are the themes or factors given relevant for conversion or transformation? You might have a different perspective on what conversion is. How does each factor or theme bear on the others? You might see relationships that I haven't. Is any kind of structure apparent? Is anything missing? So I'll give you a few minutes now from my talk from that context for you to look at that handout. And Kristen, if you could keep a check of the time for us.
Yeah, I've probably just got a few more minutes.
Yeah, thank you.
I might be jumping the gun a bit here, but I'm wondering what you might do with the data. So if you end up pretty much going with these headings, do you then draw on each of the headings, or do you look at each respondent holistically? How do you imagine the next step going?
Yeah, so it's case studies. So there are 8 Jesuits, and I look at each of them with their unique experience of change, conversion, transformation exercises. And I've already started seeing how some parts of the framework hold up. You can say, yep, this seems to be a common pattern, and other parts just don't work at all, or they only work for 1 or 2 people and not for all. I suppose in the end, what I'm hoping to offer is for people who are guiding Jesuits or others through the exercises, and it is specifically on this one, the 30 days, that they'll have a better idea of what to focus on that will enhance conversion, and what they don't need to worry about because it doesn't matter. You know, we might think, oh, this is really important. Like I thought, because Ignatius is so strong on poverty and how that brought him in touch with Jesus, I thought, well, maybe poverty is kind of a key there. But other than for 1 or 2 people, it's not relevant.
Yeah, it's always interesting, isn't it? That's research, isn't it? You know, you can come in with a...
Well, you find out things that don't work or aren't relevant when you thought they were.
I'm wondering, would you be open to me putting your email address in the chat and people can respond?
I'm grateful if anyone wants to take longer to look at that.
People might want to maybe take it away and have a look, and so let me just
would it help if I put the paper, made the paper available as well, if you guys really want to spend time checking out the background, or was that enough that you've heard me and that's enough to go on?
It's probably enough, but if people want to
if they want to get more specific, they can email me and I can send them the paper.
So I'm going to pop Ian's email address in. Did that work? No. Okay.
So I wonder if there are any immediate off the top of the head responses.
Yeah, that's a good question. And then
time for Lucy.
And I was curious about how you selected the 8 case studies.
Yep. Well, out of the 20 or so who said after the survey at the very bottom, contact me to interview, I found I wanted a mix of cultural backgrounds, but also I picked those who seemed to be the most articulate, who could really put words on their experience. I thought, well, I'm going to get more data out of them, so I picked them. And then I had the first 8, 2 of those couldn't do it or change their mind, so I had to pick another 2 to fill in there.
You said that these were based in other countries. Are they around the region, are they? Yeah. Wonderful. All right. Well, I think if it's okay with you, Ian, we might leave it there. People have got all that information. I've got the email address. So there might be some people following up and giving you some ideas.
And is there going to be a little bit of time later in the session?
There will be. Yep. Yes. So thank you. So it's just fascinating, isn't it, seeing where this research takes us? And So thank you so much, Iain. Feel free to jot down Iain's email address, and I'm going to invite Lucy to join us. Lucy just shared with us that she's 84. I hope you don't mind me sharing that. She's 84 and she has 45 pilgrims she sees over a 6-week period, and she goes and drives and sees most of them, about 2/3 of them, which absolutely blew me away and inspired me at the same time. So Lucy, if you would like to join us, Stephen, if you want to swap over the spotlight and let's turn to Lucy's research. Welcome, Lucy, and thank you for being part of the Research Symposium today.
Okay. A good morning or afternoon to everyone. Okay. And so my presentation today is exploring an experiential interactive energy triangle of potential healing, and a spiritual director is at the apex of that. The 3 points of this imaginary energy triangle are human patterns within us, shadow emergences that come up or arise, and a spiritual director facilitating awareness, depth, and healing in the directee. During this 20-minute or so presentation, there will be 3 half-minute pauses. A gentle gong will go 20 seconds at the end of the 30 seconds. Groom, in the spiritual challenge of midlife, subtitled Crisis and Challenge, makes this statement: entrance into the unconscious, going into one's inner depths, produces renewal and rebirth, spiritual rebirth. Since every spiritual direction session is a pausing to allow what is beyond consciousness to arise, it is heartening to take on board Groom's insight regarding renewal and spiritual rebirth. It means every spiritual direction session is an opportunity for renewal and spiritual rebirth. How encouraging for spiritual directors to know that this is so. For me, this statement has been for many years the umbrella and grounding statement of how I have lived into depthing my own spirituality, and as well has been an umbrella and grounding statement for how I have lived into my role of being a spiritual director. Out of many and various everyday experiences and witnessings of allowing the universal wisdom underpinning Groom's statement to reveal itself, I now rephrase its reality for me. When something from the unconscious arises into consciousness and we take notice, pause, listen, accept inner invitations to inner growth and or balancing what is out of balance in our patterns, there is a stage of healing that brings us to inner harmony and greater wholeness. And I just love this rephrasing of wholeness in the territory of inner growth used by Robert A. Johnson in Owning Your Own Shadow, where he says, to be whole means to make holy. So first of all, I'm going to share a screen, which is about these general outcome of conscious and unconscious in human experience. I'm sorry, I haven't got the right thing up. I'm very sorry about this.
No worries, Lucy, take your time.
Okay, thank you. I thought I was all ready. I practiced twice already this morning. Okay.
I'm an expert at doing just what you're doing. Believe me,
Okay.
done it dozens of times.
Okay. Thank you. Let me put this down, put it down. Okay. So now let's see what we can do. Yes, much more promising. So quite obvious to us that we have conscious awareness. Underneath that, in unconscious, total unconscious, we have sensory memory awareness. And Kristen was actually talking about that in reality for children, but it's also true for all of us. Everything we experience, we hold in sensory memory. And sometimes we can call it up and sometimes it comes back, experiences. And as well, in that level that can come up into consciousness of stuff that's stored away is day residue, which comes up in dream content. Inside that, there's another level of consciousness by the green circle, which is near conscious and potential near conscious. Sometimes one moves up into the other. And there's a third inner circle, which is the subconscious, more easily comes into consciousness, and the deep unconscious. And today I'm really talking about projection, which is what's stored in the deep unconscious that we haven't dealt with, triggered up outside by something small in the reality, but big in reaction within us. And that's the main thing. And spiritual directors have a big role to play when that happens in their spiritual direction sessions. In the deep unconscious, three of the things that I am noticing and going to speak about today is the green triangle is the true self. And for me, that's how God's reflected in my reality. The blue line is the bottom lines that we come to. And I'm going to tell a story about those two. And then the third is that collection of stuff that we're unaware of and that we've shoved around. And most of the input will be about that. So I'm telling one story where something in my bottom lines came in and there was a conversation in my subconscious. I will tell a second story where something about my true self arose and it was a conversation in my more conscious reality. And after I've told those two stories, we will look at that something which is triggered up from outside, which has a big reaction out there, triggered up from a small input. And that's the sharing for the present moment. So the stories. A bottom line story. I have a bottom line of being fiercely independent. I don't know how it came to be, and I didn't realize I had it so strongly and irremovably until many years ago in a retreat. I agreed with God that I would hand over my independence to God's self. 30 years later, it happened that when I offered to read a thank you speech for someone else, if she couldn't speak on that day, at the last moment, when it couldn't be changed, she said, "You do it." My spontaneous reaction inside was, I don't want to do that. And it was with a passion that I didn't want to. Now, while I am mostly a very articulate person, I couldn't raise one word of that thank you for 4 months. So, what a massive interior overreaction to a small interior happening. Therefore, that was interior projection triggered within me. The interior conversations I had with myself over these 4 months involved these steps: pausing, naming my feelings without filtering, owning them honestly as authentically mine, even though I very much didn't want to have them or to experience being inarticulate, and then waiting and listening to what arose. It took this 4 months before I was free enough interiorly to make a decision, rather than to be run by the autopilot energy of my bottom line reality, which would have prevented me from resolving this interior issue in a healing way for me. My fierce independence is now much more in balance, and therefore I am more whole, or as Johnson would say, made more holy. There's a half a minute pause for you to name a bottom line experience of yours coming into consciousness, and there'll be a gong before I start speaking 20 minutes after it. An example of a true self-reality coming into consciousness. I had been repressing stress for 12 months or so without knowing consciously that I was. And this is how I found out. A supervisor of a 10,000 word assignment said to me, "Don't be stressed." In my conscious awareness, I thought that was so removed from the truth of how I was that I recounted it as a story of fun a few times during the rest of that day. On the last recounting, as I walked away, a strong statement arose in me: "You can't afford to be stressed." And that was my true self caring for me through initiating an internal conversation with my conscious self. Continued repression would mean imbalanced build-up consequences that would be high on the agenda for future unconscious expression. Eventually, if not dealt with, this build-up of repression would come out sideways and affect self and others negatively. That is, projection outwards. That "don't be stressed" statement triggered a fun reaction in me, and that was projection of my repression of stress coming into consciousness. The later, "You can't afford to be stressed," was an invitation for healing if I engaged in the interior conversation that it initiated. I did engage in this interior conversation, and then made the decision that brought more balance into my life and living, because the amount of stress in this new situation did not have to be denied. In retrospect, I have a feeling that this was my inner wisdom inviting me to take action before I had burnout or a breakdown of some sort. There's a half-minute pause for you now to name a bottom line that you have. Something that can't be moved. It's always there. Maybe it's not much in your consciousness, but it's always there. And again, a gong will go 20 seconds before I start speaking. So it is noteworthy that for both the true self and bottom line arisings for the unconscious in these examples, it illustrates that the process of coming to a stage of healing is noticing, listening, owning, accepting an invitation, engaging in an interior conversation, and then activating balancing and/or growth and/or healing outcomes. There isn't time now. However, I invite you to look at the process that worked for you in your personal examples at some other time. So my name for this process of being present to inner invitations arising from previously unconscious shadow issues is shaking hands with your shadow. It's also noteworthy that emotional intelligence has a lot more to reveal of inner reality than intellectual intelligence has. A personal further note is that these experiences of shaking hands with my shadow, I did really experience what Johnson posits. As the shadow is drawn into consciousness, it becomes softer, more pliable, more gentle. Surely that's an experience of healing. Let's now explore the share, the square, which is what's built up inside us and how it gets triggered outside of us. So again, I'm attempting to share the screen, hopefully with much more smoothness. So here we are. We've got all this build up unconsciously of those things. Something outside triggers and we overreact, called projection. So there are small ways which this comes out, or less drastic ways in which this comes out. So when something out there happens and I blame, and really it's not as blameworthy as I'm loading onto the person. When I'm accusing, and again, it's not as accusable as required, but it's in us. When there's something out there, triggers off and I feel threatened, but really the person wasn't threatening or the thing isn't threatening. Loading onto is then when I put out this overreaction onto someone else. Now, those kinds of things are happening to us all the time. And in a bigger, more major way, when that happens, we have domestic violence, road rage, bullying, war, all kinds of disrespect, etc. I haven't named all the possibilities of shadow coming out sideways in a serious way. And all of these I call shadow coming out sideways. And so now, how does this work in my interactive energy triangle? Robert Johnson in Only Around Shadow says we have a dumping ground, which I've used as a bag over the shoulder. And in that dumping ground are gathered together all of our don't likes, what we've rejected, what we haven't dealt with, chosen to deal with or couldn't deal with, and what we're unaware of, that's in there. And underneath each of the experiences that meant that build-up, there was either fear or trauma or pointing the finger inside me or scratchy energy inside me. And under every one of those experiences of whatever, of that pain or sadness or what we don't like, there are pools of pain. And what happens is that something in this collection is reflected out there. We're not aware of it. We pick it up and it goes out from us, shadow coming out sideways. Another description of it. And a general name for that is projection. And what projection means is that something buried in the unconscious is coming out, but not emerging through conscious awareness. And that's one point of this triangle. The second point of this triangle is a spiritual director in the contemplative evocative mode. And the connection in this triangle of energy is that the spiritual director shakes hands with shadow, or makes a decision to shake hands with shadow, and is au fait with their experiential shadow stories. And I call that inner work. Of course, that's not all of inner work, but in this triangle, our spiritual director, aware of their human capacity for projection, is equipped to be an avenue of healing for the directee. The third point of the triangle is projection goes out onto someone, so it's coming from you or it's loaded onto you. So your directees have these experiences of from and onto, and also the two extra stories that I did of true self and bottom line, or whatever you call it, and other things. And the connection is that a spiritual director witnesses these energies. And they won't witness them if they haven't experienced them, or been in touch with them, or handled it as life has invited them to. And then the skill of spiritual direction is to ask invitational questions which enable the directee, whether it's projection from or onto or other forms of projection, enabling the directee to become conscious, bring into consciousness what wasn't in consciousness. And the role of the director is particularly important here because another way of describing what's hidden there is what we're not aware of, okay? And projection means you're not aware of it. So it's gently to invite the directee in whatever form of projection to bring that unawareness into consciousness. And when that happens, there is healing. And that's my triangle of interactive energy potential for healing. Now, I'm giving you a half a minute again to let's pop up some experience of projection, either within yourself or witnessed in other people, onto or from. And I'll stop the share at the end of the half minute. Johnson has this to say about projection from me. Heaping abuse does great damage, not only to others, but to us as well. For as we project our shadow, we give away an essential ingredient of our own psychology. Integrating such wisdom into life and living would mean having strategies to track and avoid personal projection. A very helpful partner strategy is how to cope when projection is loaded onto you. There isn't time now to detail these. However, detailed strategies are listed and described in 2 videos available on my website, virginiawaterselfcare.com.au. Under the menu heading, Be Freer, then click on Easy Strategies, and you'll find the headings Projection Onto and Projection From. In conclusion, it is out of personal experience of shaking hands with personal shadow and handling situations where projection onto has happened to them personally that spiritual directors are enabled to invite directees to come to inner healing and reconciliation. In this way, they cooperate with the mystery of God at work, increasing healing and reconciliation in the universe.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lucia. Just wonderful. I just popped a note in. I have to leave to get to another appointment, but Stephen's just going to stay on for a few minutes just to keep the conversation going. But thank you to everyone today. It was wonderful.
Indeed. Thank you, Kristen. And thank you, Lucy. Oh, wow, I really appreciated the way you, not just your message, but your weaving in just 30 seconds, which sounded like so short, but it's amazing what spirit can do once you open the door, right?
Yes.
Right? You open the door to the infinite,
is,
and it's, yeah.
The truth
thank you.
is, I was keying into, which I do over and over, everyone's story is everyone else's story with a different flavour. That's the curious experience. So, but anyway, thank you for the affirmation. I do appreciate that.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. I'm going to open it up for some questions for Lucy. Also, Iain is open to reaction. Some people are going to need to go because we're right on the 2 hours. But if you want to stay, I will stay. And remember that I'm recording this, so it will come up on our website and you'll be able to refer back to it, because I do believe in that ability to review things, because I do think it's valuable. Iain, what is your comment or question?
Thank you, Lucy. That was it's lovely to hear words and concepts put onto our experience to help us come to grips with them. I'm familiar with some Jungian descriptions of our unconscious. There are a variety of them since Jungian times. You quote Robert Johnson a lot. Is he your main, for want of a word, guru, authority, scholar? Are there others you draw on? And yeah, who do you think are the good ones to use today?
Okay, Robert Bly has another book. Okay, so okay, in my study, I'm not a Jungian analyst, but of course, as a training for spiritual director, we looked at Jungian and dreams and whatever. And I was introduced to dreams like 10 years before I did my training and for spiritual director, and that's 20 years ago. So I've had 30 years of being present to my dreams and seeing the importance. And I have devoured Johnson's. That's why I said Robert A. Johnson, because there's other Johnsons, okay, in the dream field. But I've devoured them, his books, Inner Wisdom and Inner Work, and Owning Your Own Shadow. Now, I know there's a whole lot new stuff comes out in research and so on, but for the inner journeying, he's got the essentials that you need. for me. Now, there are other books. Actually, I do dream workshops for people, teach people how to be present to dreams, my way, okay, of how you get balance, how you bring harmony between inner and outer life. That's where I come in. And I've got a shelf full, you know, of books on dreams. However, for me personally, inner work and owning your own shadow gave me a clue about where it is, what to do, and how to do it. And you know, so you can do a lot more in detail about it, but my passion is how in my ordinary life can I, without a seminar and without a PhD, bring myself to inner growth. That's my answer to the question. Robert Bly has a lovely one on dream work too, which is a small book, like Owning Your Own Shadow is about 50 pages or 60, okay? And Robert Bly has another one, it's got another name of shadow, and I can't remember the name just right now. And they are both experts in this Jungian field.
Well, thank you, Lucy. And Lucy, you mentioned 2 videos which were helpful, and I didn't get them down. I don't know if someone else did, or they can, if they can find
my website.
Your
Virginia
website,
Waters,
okay?
virginiawatersselfcare.com.au.
Okay. Virginia, I'm just gonna search for that and then drop it in case people wanna self-care. Let's see.
Virginia Waters
Here we go.
Self-Care.
I got
And
it.
it's got-
I got it.
Yes, and under Be Freer, there's a column there, Be Freer.
Yeah, I see that one.
Yes, and then you go to Easy Strategies.
I am very fond of easy strategies. They don't, my
Yes.
easy strategies don't always work
Yes.
though.
Yeah, okay, Easy Strategies. And then down there in that list, there's projection onto and projection from.
Okay.
And there's a 20-minute breakout of what I did today.
Wonderful. Okay, I found these and I'll put them in. Does someone else have a question or comment?
I just wanted to say thank you, Lucy. That was really contemplative and evocative, the way that you describe who the spiritual director is. It's given me a lot to, it's affirming and a lot to work with. I'm interested about this triangle framework that you're describing, and if there's anywhere that we could find out more information about that or revisit that.
Well, it's on my website. I have it in detail. I haven't specifically done it like the spiritual director, but I do how and the strategies for how to handle when you know you're projecting. I've got what to do, what to look at, and how you know it. And then I have the strategies for what to do when someone projects onto you. There is so much pain in the world when someone is projecting onto you, and I have a strategy to give that pain back to the projecting person. And when you do that, you gift them because you haven't allowed the projection to continue. The mystery of life can invite them to bring it into consciousness because you didn't take it on board. So that's in detail on that website. Okay.
Thank you, Lucy.
Yes, thank you to Catherine.
Wide open for other questions.
Can I make a comment?
Please do.
Yes, Margaret.
Actually, Lizzie, I have to say, I felt this whole sense of freedom when you talked about not having to receive the projection of others. You know, so I'll be interested to go to your website and look at that. But the thing that I want to ask you about is, as a spiritual director, is timing. You know, like how do you know that the directee is ready? You know, like the framework fits, but you know, there's a readiness, isn't there, in people to really have the capacity. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I told the 2 stories about bottom lines and that to show it. So really it is in a directee when I sense there's something there that's scratchy energy in them. Now, sometimes that scratchy energy, or you can actually pick blame, and you can pick that they're projecting, and you can pick that they're the victim of being projected onto. So those energies are a bit obvious. Blaming is another one that's obvious. Now, I don't tell the directee what to do, but I would say, I sense there's some energy there. It'd be worth being present to it. See, so I use those kind of questions for, so when I gave my stories of a true self and that, the conversation was happening in me because I paused and listened. Okay.
Yes.
But when you're the director, you actually do that for them through the invitation. But I don't tell them what to do. I ask them to be present to the feeling. Now, how's that? How do you think the other person felt? What can you do about it? You know, okay. What does your inner wisdom tell you? And I find out, Margaret, that the emotional wisdom in people, which is not in our culture to integrate, is wonderful. Now, I'm not saying I solve all the problems for everyone, you know, and you're right. There are some people who aren't ready to go there yet, but it's still us turning the soil for when they are ready.
And I guess by listening to what they are articulating, it's almost a sign that something's already starting to arise within them.
I
that they're
agree with
willing
that.
to disclose.
Yes.
Thank you,
And
Lucy.
even if a person gets to the question stage, why is it that I'm always angry or something like that? I say back to them, you've got the question and the answer is within you. We'll just pause. You mightn't get it today.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you, Lucy. That's real wisdom. Thank you.
Well, I'm learning a lot. I don't know about the rest of you. I'm going to sit at Lucy's feet and listen some more. Someone ask another question.
If no one else has a question, I have 2 comments. Okay.
You've earned the floor, Lucy. You go for it.
Okay. Briefly, I believe when I heard Kristen input, I believe this is an adult possibility of a version of what she was doing, which as adults we've forgotten, but this being aware of those inner scratchy points, challenges that are happening within us is a way, a bit modified, but so that's one comment that I have. I think it's an adult version, a bit limited of what Kristen was saying about that magic we have when we're children, okay? And on what Iain said, I believe that for people who haven't got the spiritual direction or not called that way, that that this triangle of looking at it without even the spiritual director bit, like going to the website, that's why it's on the website. It's available to people who haven't got spirituality. They don't name that they've got spirituality, but they have. And the trigger for spirituality are those arising within us if we pause and listen. Okay, so I think it was the right place for my input because it was, how can people get converted who haven't done the spiritual exercises? So that's my comment.
There is such a beautiful serendipity of how things fall together. Some people might call it providence. Other people might use a different word for it, but I think it is in the nature of being human that things align, and they align today. I'm so glad that all 3 of you presented. I can't think of a better combination. And I want to thank you personally for your language, which is so accessible. I love bottom line. Coming from the United States, it was always kind of a positive thing in the culture. What's the bottom line? You know, the bottom line is, what's the truth? Where are we strong? And you made me see it as what appears to be strong, which is this big barricade we've put up around our weakness. And it reminded me of something I've learned in my own experience, which is that every brick wall, almost every brick wall in my life is really a gate waiting to be opened. And my gosh,
exactly right.
Such a beautiful garden on the other side, but so hard to see it when all you can see is this massive wall. And so anything that helps us. And I'm not a spiritual director or spiritual companion, but I love what all of you do. I think it's so important. And my goal is to get it spread so that more people do it. Because when you sit and you offer the silence, or you had a wonderful phrase for talking about the questions that you asked, to bring what is unaware into awareness is essential to not just changing our connection with our spirituality, but changing our connection with all relationships. Because in my approach, my feeling is that all relationships are at heart spiritual, but because it's so hard to even get to calling them that, they become something other. They become something that we've manufactured that's a great deal less flexible and more sterile. So thank you so much, Lucy. Thank you, Iain.
And thank you, Stephen. And thank you, everyone.
Yes, and thanks. It was so much fun. What a great group we have. So I will make sure this gets recorded and posted. Check out the YouTube that SDI has. I'll try and get an announcement out to this to the group where you heard about this, so that you can have that as a resource if you want to check. I know if you're like me, it's easy to miss things. And Claire, I knew someone else would come up with a comment or question. Please.
Oh, hi. I actually had a question for Iain. I know your research is very focused in on the Jesuits' experience of the spiritual exercises, and I'm wondering if out of your research you're intending to apply that more broadly beyond a Jesuit experience to how the spiritual exercises are useful when you're not in that Jesuit context.
Yeah, well, that might be another PhD. I still haven't pinned down the results of this one, but my first aim is I hope to present something to Jesuits that will help them. But I do hope that there are relevancy for spiritual exercises done in different ways with different people. But I'm not quite looking at that yet because I can't see beyond this. But I hope there will be.
Thanks.
Yeah.
What a lovely way to spend. It's my late afternoon on a 34-degree centigrade day, hot and wonderfully hot. And so to all of you who are experiencing winter or something else, I used to live in New Zealand, so I do know what a winter down under is like. It does get cold. So take care. And remember that there's another in this series, as a few months away. I can't remember the exact date, but you will be hearing about it. And it'll be much like this one. There'll be a presenter and then a couple of roundtables, probably. Just a chance, not just to learn about people's research, but to share community as spiritual directors and spiritual companions. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Right.
Thank you.